The Al Jazeera media network has condemned the Israeli government over the deaths of two more journalists who are covering the war in Gaza. They include the son of Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau, Wael al-Dahdu, who lost other family members at the beginning of the war back in October. An AFP reporter was also killed in the strike on a car they were traveling in yesterday. They were on the way to travel some of the devastation in Gaza, especially in the area around Rafah. The Al Jazeera media network says it will continue to fight for justice for those who've been killed. It's also accused the government in Tel Aviv of violating the principles of freedom of the press by silencing journalists. Now, nearly 80 media professionals are among the nearly 23,000 people who've been killed since Israel started bombing Gaza back in October. That was after an attack by the Palestinian armed group in the south of Israel on the 7th of October. That killed more than 1,000 or nearly 1,200 people. The group also took over 200 people captive. For more on this, let's speak now to the South African National Editors Forum's project manager, Hopewell Radebe. Hopewell, a very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime. So the feeling from the likes of Al Jazeera is that journalists at this point are being deliberately targeted by Israel in Gaza. Is that a sentiment shared by SANEF?
And good evening to all your listeners. We stand head and shoulders with the journalists of Al Jazeera and other journalists that have lost their lives in Palestine trying to tell their story. Today we just held a very great send-off to Peter Magubane, who did the exact job that the journalists in Gaza are doing now. He was taking pictures of South Africa during apartheid. He was arrested. He was shot at. He dodged bullets. And things like that. So these journalists, unfortunately, have been targeted. Their families have been targeted. The last count I have is as if it's almost 100 or over 100 of journalists that are community of that area, radio and print and television, including the great journalists of Al Jazeera, among others. So we did issue a statement in November, where we called on the Israeli government to protect journalists as they're supposed to be, according to UNESCO and the United Nations protocol. And we supported the United Nations Secretary General, who really called on Israel to remember that journalists are doing their job and they need to do their job and report what is happening there. So we are working on a second strategy of what we should be doing as the South African National Editors Forum, working with our counterparts from the Committee of Protection of Journalists internationally and other international bodies such as Journalists Without Borders. So to try and make sure that we bring the plight of journalists that are dying in Gaza and make sure that the United Nations and other world bodies take steps to force the hand of Israeli government to protect those journalists.
But are industry bodies, Hopewell, really doing enough when you consider the situation in Gaza? I mean, the death toll among journalists is put among, if not the worst, during a wartime period in recent history. They're saying this is the highest we've seen, in fact, when you look at how many reporters have been killed in Gaza and even some where fighting is going on between Hezbollah and the Israelis along the border there. Are the likes of the Committee for the Protection of Journalists actually doing enough to ensure that their safety is improved and respected?
All of us, including SANEF, including the Committee for Protection of Journalists, are just pressure bodies. They are lobby groups. They don't have any powers other than to appeal and put pressure on the United Nations and countries such as the United States, who have stood head and shoulder with Israel and actually condoned Israel's action in Gaza. So we are trying to say that if we can maybe put pressure on the United States, which is a close ally of Israelis, to force the hand of the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to make sure that the journalists stop being targeted. These journalists are not being murdered or dying out of mistake or being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Some of them got calls that their houses, their homes, their families would be killed if they don't stop doing this. And indeed, those houses were bombed and they've lost children. They have lost families, fathers and mothers there, and cousins. So it is what they call, and we believe, a wrong and unfortunate, maybe even despicable actions by the government of Israel to, while it fights what it needs to fight and it believes it is legitimate in its fight, but why kill journalists who are supposed to tell the stories and document the actions of its army if it is out of hand? So we do believe that it is wrong, and we are really hoping that even through our own government and the Department of International Cooperation that is led by Minister Kado to continue to put the case of the journalists in Israel, in Gaza, that they get to be protected and that they get to do their job without fear or favor.
But is there reason to believe that the killing of journalists by Israeli forces will actually stop when you consider that almost 2 years ago, Shireen Abu Akleh, another Al Jazeera correspondent, was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper? That was initially denied by the Israeli government or the Israeli military when news first broke that she'd been killed by or at the hand of one of their members of the military, right? It eventually came out. They said, well, it was one of their snipers, but that it wasn't deliberate. Al Jazeera and her family are still not convinced that that is true. No one appears set to take any form of responsibility, face any jail time, etc. So why would, for example, the likes of Hamza Dahdu see any real justice for their murders, or their families see any justice in cases where they've been killed?
We admit that that's where maybe things got wrong. The world did not stand up and defended and demanded justice for that journalist. Had it happened, maybe we would have seen less numbers of journalists being murdered now. It kind of gave Israel an upper hand because there wasn't sufficient condemnation internationally following the death of that journalist. And we believe that maybe with us standing up and lobbying internationally and demanding action and justice for these over 100 journalists whose families, and it's not just journalists, by the way, that have died. Their own families too have been wiped out. Many of them have died through targeted bombing of their homes. So we do believe that if we were to really pull our weight, put our shoulders on the wheel, and put pressure on the United Nations and member states and lobby correctly, that we just might be able to get the action and justice for those journalists. And yes, had we done much better and screamed much louder then, we may have saved a few lives now. So yeah, we admit that maybe as the world, collectively, we did not frown or demand sufficient investigations then. Even our government now, for taking the action that it did and going to the international criminal justice to demand that the atrocities committed by Israel be looked at. We applaud that, and we just hope that there will be an element of justice for journalists there that gets to be looked at and added as an additional crime for what Israel is doing.
And briefly, Hopewell, there's been also commentary around the apparent hypocrisy of the journalism industry, perhaps more globally, when it comes to the muted response to the killing of journalists in Gaza, because we know when Western journalists have been killed, for example, in the multiple conflicts that we've witnessed, especially in the last 3 to 4 decades, there has been the solidarity, this wall of solidarity and condemnation. Why aren't we hearing, for example, American and European newsrooms and news organizations making as much noise when it's Palestinians who are killed?
We believe that they are. I think many of them are doing it. It's just that it's a divided house. Some of the journalists that are doing this are facing divided newsrooms. Sentiments are not necessarily the same. In other words, we are not speaking with one voice as the media fraternity, because some believe and subscribe to the idea that Israel has a right to self-defense, but cannot put their finger on how many deaths of innocent people is enough. How many people should die before the world says this is just too much? This is beyond what is a norm and accepted international standards. what surprises many of us is that many journalists were instrumental to to document what happened to the Jewish communities around the world during the Second World War, even during the First World War. And it took those reports of journalists that Israel used to be able to say, look what happened, look at the murders of Jewish people that happened. And today, the world is looking, as us as journalists, we are looking at what's happening in Israel. We seem divided about it, and we want to excuse and issue different, measuring standards of what constitute mass murder or massacres of people that is happening there. So in a sense, I think it's a good question that we're asking. I think all of us as journalists should look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what do we stand for? Is it for justice? And not just for journalists, by the way, for all the people who are dying there who are innocent, who had nothing to do with this. We had not planned with Hamas to kill people. We should be standing up for justice collectively.
Hopewell Radebe from SANEF, the South African National Editors Forum. Good to have your time. Thank you.